So good evening, everyone. We are still waiting for quite a few people. I think they got stuck in the traffic. So that's the reason we have the topic of this evening, the traffic, congestion, mobility in the city. So we might learn how to have the better probability to be on time. So good evening once again. My name is Michal Čáp. I'm from the Czech Center. It's a pleasure to welcome you at the second run of the AI Science Café Series. We kicked it off exactly 1 month ago at the Royal Institutions on a topic of privacy and personal security. You might be asking why Czech Center is doing such a series. It's going to be 5 or 6 months almost on the AI. the topic which has not been really well known a couple of years ago in the companies or institutions, individuals. But I think the situation is changing dramatically. I think the AI, it's impacting even today a lot of industries. It's starting to impact in the area of communications, our personal lives, and of course, I believe it's just the beginning. I think what we're going to see in the next 10, 15 years, would be the role of AI. So as you probably know from the media, that the AI is playing chess and beating the best chess players in the world, or composing the classical music. I think the potential of the AI is clearly much larger. And we dedicated each of the AI Science Café to one topic. As I mentioned, the first one was on privacy security. We're going to have communications. We will have preservation, the wildlife, robotizations. And today we're going to have mobility. I think it's a very important topic, close to our heart, especially for someone who is living in the large cities like London, New York, LA, or even Prague. I believe in the mobility. There are going to be 4 prevailing trends that's going to impact mobility in the future. And one is the autonomous driving. Today we have more semi-autonomous. Some of you might have the cars, which are going to park it by itself. But it's clearly on the way to autonomous driving, and there are a number of companies testing the cars already today. I think the second driving force is going to be connectivity. The cars in the future are going to look much more like your iPhones or computers than the cars. They're going to be mutually connected with each other. They are connected with the infrastructure. There are going to be tremendous amounts of data coming from these vehicles and from the cars that the industry is going to use going future. The third one is electricity, the electric cars. I think there's a strong push by the government, by the green energy. You can see it clearly in London. There's a steeply increasing number of the electric cars. I've been a couple of weeks ago in Paris. It seems the trend has not gone there that much. And you can see it also on the charger infrastructure, which is not that developed in some of the countries. On the contrary, it's fairly well developed in Scandinavia, but in some of the cities you might not expect it, in Shanghai or Beijing, for example, so the electric cars. And the fourth area, it's going to be the car sharing or pooling the cars. And we blend all that together. I think that's going to be the future. And we are very fortunate. We are going to have 2 distinguished speakers, which I'd like to introduce to you, experts on the topics, which will be talking mostly about the autonomous driving, but also about the car sharing. So let me introduce Michal Čáp, who is the AI researcher coming from the Czech Technical University, from the AI Center, but he's currently the technology lead at ICAI at the MIT Massachusetts Institute of Technology in Boston spin-off. And after his presentation, there will be a dialogue, a debate with another expert on the topic based here in London, Panagiotis Angeloudis. He is from the Imperial College of London. He's senior lecturer there and also a director of the transport system and logistics at the Imperial. So without any further ado, I would like Michal to turn the floor for his presentation and wish you an inspiring evening. So thank you.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction. So today I would like to share with you the results of our research on self-driving cars and how they influence the future of urban mobility. This is joint work that I did with Emilio Frazzoli and Javier Alonso Mora from TU Delft and MIT respectively, and some of the PhD students at CTU in Prague. So let me start very broadly. We are living in the era of urbanization. More and more economic activity is happening in the cities. Cities are becoming melting pots where people come together to combine their expertise to create complex, high value-added products. What is really important in the process is that we can move easily within the city. So cities cater this need by providing us access to multimodal infrastructure. So for example, if you want to move from one place to another in London, you can do so in several various ways. You can take public transport, you can take your own vehicle and drive it, you can walk, or you could bike. The private car, in particular, has a very special place in the mix. Mostly because in certain situations it doesn't have a good alternative. Imagine, for example, if you want to move from a place that is not well connected to public transport. Now, we also know very well that driving comes with a number of problems. The first one is that urban roads do not have sufficient capacity, which leads to congestion. Second common problem that we all know is that there's not enough parking capacity in cities, leading to problems with how do we find a parking space at the destination. And also, finally, cars pollute and are noisy, which decreases our quality of life in the cities. So the traditional solution to the first two problems is to build more roads and build more parking structures. Unfortunately, most large cities have most of the lands developed. So if you want to build a new road, what it amounts to is to either take down an existing building or to dig a tunnel, which is extremely expensive. Another traditional answer would be to heavily subsidize public transport to make it an attractive alternative to driving. So for example, in London, only 40% of the income to public transport comes from fares. Some cities subsidize even more. In Prague, there would be only 25%. So we cannot easily build more roads and more parking space in the cities. And also, not everyone is willing to use public transport. We subsidize it, but still the modal share of cars remains on those like 35% range. So is there anything else we can do to fix those problems that I just described? There are two new models for individual traveling in cars that could solve some of those problems. The first is car sharing, the other one is ride sharing. In car sharing, a single car is used by multiple people during one day, which increases the utilization of the car, so we can serve we can serve the same amount of trips by fewer vehicles, which in turn reduces the parking capacity requirements. In this picture, I'm showing a typical day of a car in a city. So what happens typically is that the car sits on the parking spot in front of the owner's house for several hours, 10 hours, 13 hours. Then it is used to get the owner to its workplace. Then it sits in front of the office for 8 or more hours. Then it is used to get to some social event, grocery store. And then it is used again to get the owner home. So in this specific example, if you count the numbers, you get to a utilization of 6%. So 94% of the time, the car just sits there, idle, doing nothing. So there are companies like Zipcar, Car4Way, or Car2Go that try to increase the utilization of private vehicles by providing access to a fleet of shared cars that can be rented for short periods of time. As you probably know, those didn't really gain much mainstream acceptance, mostly because it's still not convenient enough to be used on a daily basis. Interestingly, taxis can be also considered as a form of car sharing, because one taxi vehicle can serve multiple people during one day. The second model is ride sharing. In ride sharing, we try to serve multiple people simultaneously by one vehicle. This way, we can reduce the vehicular traffic on the roads. A typical car in a city has only one person in it, the driver. if we somehow manage to increase the occupancy, if we manage to motivate people to ride share and to fill the car up to its maximum capacity, we could replace those 8 cars with just 2 cars. Now the problem is that we don't really know how to do that. So all the efforts to implement peer-to-peer ride sharing in cities have failed. There's nothing that really works. What somewhat works is ride sharing with a professional driver. So that would be the services that you probably know as Uber Pool or Lyft Line. And those are sort of convenient enough to be actually used by sort of general public. So from those 2 examples, it is interesting to observe that taxis are actually, or mobility on-demand systems in general, are actually pretty good for cities, because they can enable car sharing and ride sharing. The reason why we don't switch from our cars to taxi cars for our daily transportation is that taxis need a professional driver. There are 2 problems with that. One is that we have to pay the driver to drive the car. The second one is even if we wanted to replace all private cars by shared taxi cars, we wouldn't find enough people that would be willing to work as taxi drivers. And this is where self-driving comes into picture. If we somehow remove the driver from the equation, suddenly we can scale this idea up. So we are able to reduce the cost of using a taxi or on-demand mobility vehicle to a level that is when it is cheaper than using your own private car. And also we are not constrained by the sort of the constrained number of drivers that we have at the market. So this idea is precisely what all the self-driving, or most of the self-driving companies that you know, are pursuing. Waymo, Uber, Cruise, Autonomy, all of them have a business model of becoming mobility on-demand companies. They want to come to a city and deploy a large fleet of autonomous vehicles that could be hailed for point-to-point transportation at a price that is lower than using your own car. Now, this is an idea that is pretty old, and there has been a heated debate on what does it mean for cities. So you could find people that would be painting utopian future where we replace all the private cars and we convert the parking spaces that are not needed anymore into urban gardens and bike lanes. We also find people that would argue that the cities of future will look very dystopian. We will have the roads that are clogged by aimlessly roaming large fleets of autonomous vehicles, and those 2 contradictory views are sort of very hard to integrate. So what did we do is that we try to build models that will give us some sort of principled idea on what are the trade-offs that we will have to deal with when we try to, or when companies like Uber will try to deploy this technology to our cities. So first thing that we did is that we tried to understand what are the limits of large-scale car sharing implemented through automated mobility on demand. So here is the scenario that we were targeting. It's a sort of intentionally extreme scenario where we ask what would happen if we replace all private cars in the city by a fleet of autonomous vehicles. That is, every trip that we do today by driving in our own car would be served by an autonomous taxi. And we are interested in knowing how many cars we need and what will be the implications for the traffic in the city. So in order to do an analysis like this, we actually need to know how people use their cars and where do they go. This is very hard. This is kind of data that is very hard to come by. We like to use 2 data sources. One is a transportation demand model that we develop at CTU in Prague. It's a model that fuses 3 main data sources. It fuses census data, travel diaries, these are questionnaires, and data from mobile operators. And it's able to synthesize a data set. It's roughly 1 million trips. That is representative of all trips by a private car during a working day in Prague. So that's one source. Another source that many people in academia like to use is New York taxi dataset. This is a dataset that contains every single taxi trip by license. So these are the yellow taxis in New York. This is roughly 400,000 trips a day, and it's very useful for all sorts of analytical work that tries to understand and analyze mobility on demand systems. When we have the demand, we need to design the system so that it provides the same quality of service as we have now with our private cars. So the way we define it is that what we want is that if you call a self-driving taxi, it will come within 2 minutes sort of guaranteed. So one way to do it is that you partition the city into small regions. Every region has a station. This station acts as a parking lot, and when you call a taxi, a vehicle is dispatched from the station. It will arrive to the pickup location, will pick you up, drive you to the destination, and after drop-off it returns to the nearest station. One important thing that you need to ensure is that you need to keep all of those stations non-empty, so that you have vehicles that you can dispatch. This turns out to be non-trivial. And this is mostly because urban transportation patterns are imbalanced. For example, during the morning peak, most people want to go from residential areas to urban areas, to business areas, and there is only very few people who actually want to travel in the opposite direction. Now the problem with that is that you will start losing the vehicles in the residential area, so this station will inevitably become empty, and the vehicles will start accumulating in the business area, and nobody wants them there. So the only way to counteract this imbalance is to start sending empty vehicles in the opposite direction. This is a process called rebalancing, and this is something that appears in all shared transportation systems. This was easy, relatively. Now if you make it more complex, we have 3 stations, and we are asking what are the flows that will stabilize the system. We can naively come up with a solution that looks like this. This is you just subtract the 2 numbers. But actually you can show that you can balance the system cheaper by doing this. So what we do is that we develop models that will tell us what is the cheapest way to stabilize the number of vehicles in every station so that you can provide a guaranteed quality of service to your customers. So this is one of the papers that we developed where we are also able to handle uncertainty in travel demand. Now when we have an algorithm like this, we can feed it with the demand data. So in this case we feed it with the transportation demand of Prague, 1 million trips. Currently served by roughly 300,000 vehicles. This is because when you take a personal car, at the beginning of the day, on average it will do 3 trips during the day. You will go to work, from work, and some other sort of errand that you might do during the day. Now, we run it through the algorithm, and it will compute what is the minimum fleet size of a shared vehicle fleet that we need to serve this demand at the same quality of service as having your own car. So in this case, this would yield 60,000 shared vehicles, which is a dramatic decrease of the fleet size, roughly 5-fold. And moreover, those vehicles, they are utilized more, meaning that they spend less time parking, which translates to even large savings in terms of parking space requirements. So here we estimate roughly 20-fold reduction in the parking space needed. What you pay for that is the extra traffic that the vehicles have to drive due to rebalancing. So essentially the extra traffic when the vehicle drives empty from one passenger to another. There's a fundamental number that just stems from the fact that the balance is that the demand is imbalanced. And for Prague, the number is 35%. If you do the analysis for other cities, you get very similar numbers. So Singapore will be something like 30%. Essentially, for most cities, the number looks like this. We also simulate the system. In a micro simulation, just to give you an idea how it looks, this is all those 60,000 vehicles. The red dots are passengers that are waiting to be picked up. The blue triangles are vehicles that have been dispatched to pick up some passenger, and the green triangles are the rebalancing flows. So these are the vehicles that move from areas that that have too many vehicles to areas that have too little vehicles. What we can do is that then we can keep track of how many vehicles are passing through each road segment, and then we can analyze the data to see how well the road network utilization change relative to the current system. So then you get a plot that looks like this. You can clearly see that the road network is much more stressed in the scenario where you deploy an automated mobility on-demand system with car sharing. So you drastically reduce the fleet size, you drastically reduce the parking space requirements, but you pay with 30% extra traffic, which is a problem because right now the road network in most cities is already beyond its capacity, so you're only doing the traffic congestion worse. So as we already discussed, one way to reduce vehicular traffic is to put more people into one car. The general idea is that you find people that travel in the same direction, you sort of match them together, and you transport them in one vehicle. This is an interesting mathematical problem. It's very non-trivial to solve. Roughly it looks like this. We have a fleet of vehicles, could be very large. We have a transportation demand that is defined as a set of requests. Each request has some origin, some destination. And we also have the maximum delay that we induce due to ride sharing. So we essentially promise to each customer we will not delay you more than this number. What we are asking for is a route for each vehicle such that collectively all passengers are served. Well, this is in general this is known to be an intractable problem, but we figured that for the instances that appear in urban ride sharing, you can actually develop an algorithm that can efficiently solve most of those instances up to optimality. So for the people with technical background, the way we do it is that we generate like all possible groups of passengers almost exhaustively, and then we are looking for an assignment. So we are looking for which group we should assign to each vehicle such that every passenger is served and some objective criterion is optimized. So we get, in this example, the vehicle number 1 is having 1 passenger, vehicle number 2 is having passenger 1 and 4, and there is some other vehicle that is serving passenger 3. We consider 2 optimization criteria, so we care about 2 quality metrics. Typically the passengers want to be in their destination as fast as possible, so they care about the quality of service. The operator of the fleet cares about the operation cost, so they want to minimize, this is roughly proportional to the total vehicle distance driven in the system. Those 2 objectives are in conflict, so you cannot improve both of them simultaneously. So what we do is that, sort of conceptually, you can plot every possible solution on a plane, where on horizontal axis is the delay that the passengers have to bear, on the vertical axis is the number of vehicle miles traveled, so the operation cost. And those solutions, the red ones, are solutions that are so-called undominated or Pareto optimal, meaning that you cannot further improve them without making, you cannot improve one criteria without making the other criteria worse. If you draw a line through those points, you get something called Pareto front or trade-off curve, which represents graphically the fundamental limits of ride sharing. What it means is that it is fundamentally impossible to achieve performance that would lie below this curve. This is very important because if you are a city or Uber or an operator of such a fleet, the rational thing for you to do is to pick a point on this curve. This is the best thing you can do. And then it just becomes a question of, do we want an expensive system or a very comfortable system? Right. So the one extreme point looks like this. We just assign a dedicated vehicle to every passenger. And then as we go down the curve, we start matching people that have the most similar sort of trips, they go in the most similar destination. Then we match more and more people together. And in this extreme case, there is no better solution that wouldn't violate the maximum delay constraints. And we see that we served all the passengers with only 2 vehicles. Here I will show you an actual output of the algorithm. These are randomly generated requests where start is picked randomly from the square, destination is picked randomly from the square. And you can see the curve for this particular travel demand. In one extreme, everybody gets its own vehicle, and then you can start putting people together. And in this extreme point, you could see that some of the cars have 3 people, some of the cars have 2 people, some people still travel together. Some people still travel alone. So there is one of my collaborators, Javier Alonso Mora, that is currently a professor at TU Delft, has used a very similar algorithm and applied it to the New York taxi data. So what he did, he took New York taxi data and he tried to analyze how much efficiency can we squeeze by ride sharing. So what would happen if taxi drivers would start accepting multiple people on board? This is a video from his simulation. So you can see Manhattan, 3,000 vehicles. The color represents the number of passengers in the vehicle. So the light blue ones are inactive; they are just waiting. They don't have anything to do. The dark blue are rebalancing vehicles. They move from spaces where there is no demand to spaces where there is demand. And then we highlight 2 vehicles and show their path. So what you see here is that it's a plan for the vehicle. The star represents the pickup point of 1 passenger, and the triangles represent drop-off points. What you see is that as new requests are coming, he's continuously replanning the ride-sharing solution. So you end up with this sort of a system that responds to demand and tries to sort of maintain high occupancy of the vehicles. So what he found is that he can serve the entire demand with only 3,000 vehicles. Just to put this number into context, the current size of the fleet in New York, there is 11,000 licensed taxis in New York that currently serve the demand that we have in the data set. There is a related work that try to analyze, if you just try to optimize it as much as possible with single occupancy taxis without ride sharing, by how much you can reduce the fleet. That's Carlo Ratte and his group's work. They arrived to a number 6,000. And then what Javier has found is that if you increase the capacity, you can reduce the fleet size even more. So we did something similar for Prague. We implemented and applied a very similar algorithm, and these are the results. So what we found is that we can further reduce the fleet size, roughly to 1/3 of the mobility of demand system with single occupancy vehicle. But more importantly, we got rid of the problem of those extra rebalancing kilometers. So very roughly, what happened is that compared to the current state, if everything works, so if everyone is willing to share, we can reduce the amount of traffic in the network to roughly 1/2 of the current state. What we are paying for it is an increase in travel time, 3 minutes. So 3 minutes relative to the current state, when we just sort of have a vehicle that is right in front of our house. If we compare it to the mobility on demand system without ride sharing, actually the increase is not that big. It's like 50 seconds, as you can see. Okay, to conclude, in this presentation, I wanted to sort of show you what we can expect from self-driving vehicles. So they will be likely deployed as part of large fleets that will be centrally controlled, that could be used to employ large-scale car sharing and large-scale ride sharing. What is interesting is that if we only employ vehicle sharing, we will hit a problem of increased vehicular traffic that we can't really afford to have. So the only viable way to deploy those technologies is to actually somehow motivate people to share their vehicles to some extent. Now, there's still a lot of questions. So all those analyses are based on very optimistic assumptions. So one of the optimistic assumptions is that we assume that the demand for private transportation will remain constant, meaning there will be no. If I give you an autonomous vehicle, you'll be as likely to use it as you are today to use your own car. This is unrealistic because it is likely this might be cheaper and more comfortable than cars today, which might mean that people will start switching from public transport or just simply travel more. The second big question is, how do you actually motivate people to ride share? This is the big one, right? We see that it is necessary to do, but not everyone is willing to do that. So we'll have to come up with some incentives, some policies that will motivate people to actually do that. So I'll stop here. Thank you for your attention. And I believe that this topic has still a lot of questions that need to be worked on.
The field has grown. I mean, we saw, from my experience, transportation, which had been started in the 50s with highway engineering, in the 70s, where people were focusing on congestion charging. And there has always been an element of how you build pavements and how do you layer the concrete on the streets. Recently we've seen it going from this field, which was mostly engineering and later also economics, to also now have the audience to also attract people with backgrounds like yours in robotics, machine learning and so on. But you mentioned something very interesting, that it was an obscure topic at some point, and then suddenly it exploded with interest. I mean, since you were in that field and you had a first-hand view, can you trace the trigger? Can you remember what caused this explosion of interest?
Yeah, I think the trigger really was when Google went out and they announced that they have driven 500,000 miles on public roads autonomously. And then people suddenly started realizing that, okay, this is just not a toy. This might have a real impact.
Okay.
Now we are seeing a bit of a cool down, right?
Yeah.
But that was the atmosphere back then, 5 years ago.
But about you again, you made a transition. And this is something that happens many times in researcher careers. It's actually one of the beauties of the profession, that you have always the chance to hop around the topics that you're dealing with. From personal experience, when I've done this, is that there were some topics that seemed obvious, but then once I started going deeper into them, I realized that there's a lot of the things that I didn't know before, and they served in order to captivate my attention even more. How about yourself? Was there anything in particular that surprised you in the very early days of your adventures in mobility and autonomous vehicles?
One interesting thing is that there is a field called transportation research that
is there any other field
that cares a lot. Essentially, this is the field that tries to give us answers on how do we build highways, where we should build highways, and this field is very incremental. It's when you talk to people who work in this field, they try to make progress by making incremental steps.
Yes,
by making traffic lights a bit smarter. And where we came from, we essentially said, okay, what if we could design the entire transportation system from scratch?
Yes.
Like, just throw out everything you have and try to do it, from scratch, completely new. And the old practitioners, this is totally like impossible thought.
Yeah.
Like, no, we have those highways. They are there. We invested a lot of money into them. We have to keep them. We have to do it the way we do it, and only do little changes to improve the system. So that was a big of a surprise that you cannot convince sort of the people who are responsible for our highways with this type of approach, which is surprising because when we do infrastructure decisions, they need to last for 50 years, 100 years, right? We built a bridge. This bridge has to make sense in 50 years. So one would think that you actually have to have a 50-year long horizon.
Yes.
In future.
But there needs to be some transition. I mean, surely the answer should lie between the two. I mean, I can imagine that while I hate being stuck behind a traffic light, I waste several hours of every day. I don't want to think what would happen if we went in every junction in London and removed all the traffic lights. I mean, it won't be such a pleasant experience.
That's true. It's very hard to imagine in London, for example. But you could definitely imagine disruptive changes like dedicating one lane to vehicles that have some special ability. For example, vehicles that can drive very close to each other using sophisticated electronics. Even that is a bit of a radical thought in this transportation research field.
So I guess at least for some time the old guard and the Googles of the world need to find a way to coexist so that we can ensure that we don't go from where we are to a gridlock.
That's true, and I think this is what makes it hard, and this is the reason why we see definitely progress in environments that we can control, like all sorts of warehouses and campuses that are sort of behind a fence and where we can change a little bit the environment.
Yeah,
it's doable, but we see that the progress in open environments where we have people, a lot of uncertainty, and people who are willing to take risks, it is very hard to coexist with them because you essentially have to be at a very similar level of cognition as those drivers around you.
But it's interesting that you mentioned warehouses, because I can relate that to my own background, because I did my PhD in autonomous sports in 2005, so in autonomous container terminals. And something that many people don't realize is that we have had autonomous vehicles, so we don't call them autonomous vehicles, we call them automated guided vehicles in warehouses since the 70s. And in places such as Rotterdam and also in places such as London Thameспort since the 1990s. So they have been around, but the only fundamental difference is that small change in the world. So it's not autonomous, it's automated, which means that they don't decide for their own, but they're centrally coordinated. And that change makes all the difference in the field.